You wake in complete darkness, iron cutting into your wrists. The air is thick with rot and salt, so heavy it burns your throat when you breathe. You cannot see where you are, only hear water slamming against wood and the quiet crying of other women chained nearby. 6 days ago, your life was prayer and silence. 6 days ago, stone walls and candlelight surrounded you. You believed your vows made you untouchable. You believed the monastery was sacred ground. You believed God watched over this island. That belief ended at dawn, when shadows came out of the fog and ships slid toward the shore like living nightmares. Men from the north poured onto the beach. They killed without hesitation. They showed no fear of crosses or altars. They slaughtered monks where they prayed, stole what generations had built, and set holy ground on fire. When they reached you, they made a choice worse than mercy. They spared your life, not to save you, but to claim you. Because breaking what Christians held sacred was their greatest victory. As the ship moves north, every mile takes you farther from home, farther from rescue, farther from the girl you were. No one follows, no one comes, and that silence will haunt you forever. At dawn on June 8, 793, Lindisfarne rested quietly off the coast of Northumbria. For more than a century, it had been one of the holiest places in Christendom. Monks prayed there daily. Nuns lived lives shaped by devotion and discipline. Sacred texts were copied by hand. Relics of saints were guarded with care. Gold vessels, silver crosses, and illuminated manuscripts filled the monastery, not as displays of wealth, but as offerings of faith. Rumors of raids had reached the coast, but Lindisfarne believed itself protected. Holy ground was not meant to fall. That morning, thick fog hid the horizon. The watchmen saw nothing until it was too late. Longships broke through the mist, dragon heads carved into their prows. By the time the bells rang, the attackers were already ashore. They did not speak. They did not negotiate. They struck. Monks who approached in peace were cut down instantly. Others tried to flee or hide. None survived. The attack lasted only hours. By noon, 47 monks lay dead. The monastery burned, and the nuns were still alive. That was not an accident. The attackers knew exactly what they wanted. In Viking society, slavery followed rules. Some captives worked fields or homes. Others were taken into households in more personal roles. Christian women from monasteries were especially valued. They were educated, disciplined, and symbolically powerful. Taking them was not just profit. It was a statement. On the beach, the women were stripped of their habits and examined like property. Age, health, and strength were judged in silence. One older woman was killed immediately. The rest were bound and dragged to the ships. Smoke rose behind them as Lindisfarne burned. No king sent soldiers. No bishop raised an army. Everyone knew what happened to captives taken by the Vikings, and everyone remained silent. The voyage north lasted weeks. The women were chained below deck in dark, airless holds. Food was scarce and foul. Privacy did not exist. The conditions were meant to break them. They were denied their routines, their names, their dignity. Their hair was cut. Their prayers were mocked. They were forced to witness rituals meant to prove that their God had no power here. Day after day passed without answers. The mind, when trapped in endless uncertainty, begins to shut down. Resistance fades, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. By the time the ships reached Norway, many of the captives had already surrendered inside. That surrender was the goal. Life in captivity followed a brutal pattern. Some women were sent to work as household slaves. Others were claimed through pagan rituals that erased their former identities and bound them permanently to new masters. Their labor never ended. Their education was used. Their bodies bore the cost. Many endured repeated pregnancies without care or rest. Injuries healed poorly. Pain became constant. Some died young. Others lived on for decades, shaped by suffering. Yet even in captivity, some held onto fragments of faith. They whispered prayers at night. They taught stories quietly to children. Over time, these women taken to humiliate Christianity became one of the forces that carried it into Scandinavia. When Viking leaders converted generations later, many were influenced by mothers and grandmothers who had arrived in chains. These women were never honored. Their names were lost, their stories erased, but their endurance changed history. Remembering them is the only justice left. At dawn on June 8, 793, the island of Lindisfarne lay quiet off the coast of Northumbria. For generations, it had been a place of prayer and learning, known across Christendom as holy ground. Monks rose before sunrise to chant psalms. Nuns lived by strict rules of discipline and faith. Sacred books were copied by hand, letter by letter, in cold stone rooms warmed only by candles. Relics of saints rested there, along with gifts given by kings and pilgrims over many years. Gold cups, silver crosses, and jeweled manuscripts were not symbols of wealth, but offerings meant to honor God. Rumors had reached the mainland about attacks along the coast, strange ships and brutal raids, but Lindisfarne believed itself protected. This place belonged to God, and God would defend it. That morning, a thick fog covered the sea. The watchman saw nothing until dark shapes slid out of the mist. Longships moved silently toward shore, their carved prows staring forward like beasts. By the time the alarm bells rang, it was already too late. The attackers rushed the beach without hesitation. They did not speak or demand surrender. They struck immediately. Monks who approached with open hands were killed where they stood. Others tried to flee through the cloisters or hide among the buildings. But there was nowhere to escape. The attackers moved with purpose, splitting into groups, heading straight for the church, the treasury, and the living quarters. By midday, the monastery was burning, the stones stained with blood. 47 monks were dead. The prayers that had filled the island for over a century were silenced in a single morning. And amid the ruins, the women were left alive, surrounded by smoke, fear, and a future they could not yet imagine. The women were not spared by chance. The attackers made their choices carefully, guided by rules that shaped their society. In the Viking world, slavery was not random cruelty, but an organized system. Some captives were meant for hard labor in fields or workshops. Others were taken into households to serve more personal roles. Christian women from monasteries held a special place in that system. They were educated in a time when most people could not read. They understood medicine, weaving, record-keeping, and prayer. More than that, they represented something the Vikings despised and challenged, a rival faith that claimed moral power over their world. Taking these women was both practical and symbolic. On the beach, the nuns were stripped of their habits, the clothing that had marked them as brides of Christ. Their ages were guessed. Their health was judged with cold eyes. Teeth were checked, skin examined for illness, bodies measured for strength. One older woman was declared useless and killed without hesitation. Her death meant to send a clear message to the rest. The remaining women were bound tightly and dragged toward the ships. Behind them, the monastery burned. Smoke rose into the sky as if carrying their prayers away. No soldiers arrived. No ships followed in pursuit. Everyone along the coast knew what had happened, and no one moved to stop it. The journey north was slow and deliberate. The women were chained below deck in dark, airless spaces where the smell of fish, salt, and waste clung to everything. They were fed scraps barely fit to eat and given little water. They were forced to sit in filth with no privacy and no rest. This was not carelessness. It was method. Day after day passed with no sense of time. The women were denied answers, denied comfort, denied the smallest control over their own bodies. Their hair was cut away, erasing another part of their identity. Their prayers were mocked, their faith challenged openly. They were made to witness rituals meant to show that the gods of the north ruled here, not Christ. Slowly, fear turned into numbness. The mind, trapped with no escape and no hope, began to shut itself down. By the time the ships neared their destination, many of the women had already been broken inside. That breaking was not accidental. It was the foundation of everything that would follow. When the ships finally reached the northern coast, the women were brought out into the light for the first time in weeks. Their bodies were weak, their faces hollow, their sense of time completely gone. They were taken inland to wooden compounds used for processing captives. These places were not prisons in the way they understood them. They were holding grounds where human lives were sorted like goods. The women were washed, not out of kindness, but because property was expected to be kept usable. Older Norse women examined them closely, judging health, strength, and the ability to endure work and childbirth. Quiet decisions were made that would define the rest of their lives. Some were sent away immediately to work as household servants, assigned to cooking, cleaning, weaving, and labor that never truly ended. Others were claimed by powerful men through rituals that erased their former lives completely. These ceremonies were public and symbolic, designed to show ownership and control. The women did not understand the words spoken, but they understood the meaning. Their old names were no longer used. Their past vows were declared meaningless. Everything they had been taught to value was treated as something to be crushed and replaced. Resistance brought punishment. Silence brought survival. Life afterward followed a harsh routine. Work began before sunrise and ended only when exhaustion forced sleep. Many of the women were expected to bear children repeatedly, with no rest and no care. Injuries were common. Pain became constant. Some women died young, their bodies unable to endure the strain. Others lived on, worn down year by year, carrying scars that never healed. Yet even in this life, fragments of who they once were survived. Some whispered prayers at night. Some traced crosses in the dirt when no one watched. Some taught stories quietly to children, passing on memories they were forbidden to keep. The captors believed they had destroyed these women completely. They never realized how much had endured beneath the surface. What followed was not a short nightmare, but a lifetime shaped by endurance. Years passed. Seasons changed. The women aged in captivity, their lives measured not by feast days or prayers, but by labor and survival. Some adapted outwardly while holding their beliefs in silence. Others began to doubt, not because they wanted to abandon their faith, but because constant suffering wears down even the strongest spirit. They were mocked endlessly, asked where their God was, asked why he had not saved them. Over time, the questions became harder to answer, even in their own hearts. Survival demanded compromise. Silence became protection. Yet history turned in an unexpected way. These women, taken to humiliate Christianity, slowly carried it into the very homes of their captors. They raised children who heard Christian prayers alongside Norse songs. They told stories of Christ in whispers. They shaped beliefs quietly, patiently, over decades. When Scandinavian leaders began converting generations later, many were influenced not by missionaries, but by mothers, grandmothers, and household women who had arrived in chains. Faith did not enter Scandinavia by sword alone, but through suffering that refused to disappear. Most of these women vanished from official records. Their names were not written down. Their pain was inconvenient to both church and saga. Archaeology gives us only fragments, graves marked with both crosses and pagan symbols. Bones showing years of labor, bodies shaped by repeated hardship. Their DNA lives on, even if their stories were buried. They were not saints celebrated by the church, nor heroes praised by Viking legend. They were survivors. Remembering them honestly is the only justice left. Their suffering mattered, their endurance mattered, and the world we live in was shaped, in part, by what they were forced to survive. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If this story moved you, take a second to like the video. It helps these forgotten voices be heard. Subscribe for more real history that textbooks and movies choose to ignore. Drop a comment if you think stories like this deserve to be remembered. If you're new here, hit subscribe and join us as we uncover the parts of history others tried to erase. Share your thoughts below. History only stays alive when we talk about it. Like, comment, and subscribe if you believe the past should be told honestly, no matter how dark.